Today's conversation is with Dr. David Shoemaker, a clinical psychologist in private practice specializing in Jungian and cognitive behavioral psychotherapy, Chancellor and Prolocutor of the Temple of the Silver Star, and a student and supervisor within the AA and OTO since 1993. He is the author of Living Thelema, a practical guide to attainment, and Aleister Crowley's System of Magic, The Winds of Wisdom, in his most recent work, The Way of the Will, Thelema in Action, as well as the very popular, in my eyes, Living Thelema podcast. There are not many people you can sit down with who have actually done the work, who have gone through the grades, lost a teacher, crossed their own abyss, and come out the other side, still standing in the tradition with something real to say about it. Dr. Shoemaker is one of those people. And what strikes me most about him is not the titles or the lineages, as important as those things just may be, but it's the clarity. When he speaks about Thelema and magic, about true will, and about what Crowley was actually building and why it still matters today, there's no performance in it. It's just a man who has lived the system long enough to know what it actually does. We go deep in this one. Crowley myths, the Golden Dawn schisms, what initiation actually transmits that the books cannot. The relationship between magic and psychology, why the inner work is the only thing that changes your life from the inside out. If this conversation opens something in you, if it confirms what you've been circling, or names something you couldn't quite put into words yet, then you are already in the right place. And make sure, if you haven't already, subscribe to MagusintheMedia and stay close, because this is exactly the kind of conversations that we are here to have. And there are many, many more where this one has come from. Now, let's begin. Welcome back to Magus in the Media. Everyone out there, we have a special guest this fine day, and I've actually been wanting to chat with this fine gentleman for quite some time. I think a lot of us know who he is, or you've read some of his books, but he is definitely a breath of fresh air in a strange and chaotic world of ungrounded characters. Dr. David Shoemaker is a author, a doctor, a psychologist, also running his own organizations. His most popular books are Living Thelema, A Practical Guide to the Attainment of Aleister Crowley's System of Magic, as well as The Living Thelema and Way of the Will. These books are fantastic. I have read them all, and they have definitely been huge in my own life. I'd like to say welcome all to this fine day and this amazing conversation. Hello, Dr. David Shoemaker. How are you today?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day here, and kind of looking out the window to my side yard now, and it's a very pleasant background for what we're doing here.
Well, that's fantastic.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. I'd like to get right into things. And first off, I'd like just to kind of ask you, and I think a lot of people probably know, but what was your first introduction to the great beast, Aleister Crowley, and his System of Thelema?
It was via my exploration of Carl Jung's work when I was a graduate student getting my psychology doctorate. And I found myself, through exploring Jung, being drawn to the mystery of it, drawn to the depth of that, and wanting more of that in my life somehow. I wasn't at first thinking I need to pursue a spiritual path. I was thinking more along the lines of exploring some depth psychology, but I realized it was a spiritual yearning that had been mostly unsatisfied in my life. And my musical work had been a kind of a way of touching that, but I hadn't realized I really wanted to be on a path. So I started exploring, at first, very briefly, just general pagan sources, but wasn't long before I came across the work of Israel Regardie, who was writing books like The Middle Pillar, where he's connecting Jungian psychology and Kabbalistic psychology and Crowley. And so that was kind of the gateway, where I realized, once I started reading Crowley in the original, that there's some brilliant stuff to explore there in terms of a system left to us to do the work ourselves. And that was the door, really.
Nice, awesome. So, deep question would be: do you feel like Israel Regardie and his work actually is a good representation of what Crowley was doing?
Not necessarily. I think he's his own thing. He is a bit of a bridge between the more traditional Golden Dawn approaches and Thelema, just because of his association with Crowley, and of course, working as his secretary in the 20s, and just the overlap in magical work. But his writings about Crowley, like biographically, I think the Eye in the Triangle being the prominent example that gets cited. I think you can, if you have a deeper and more nuanced study of Crowley, or knowledge of Crowley's life and work, I think you can see the places where Regardie may misunderstand things or overemphasize certain things or have some sour grapes about personal interactions and such. So I wouldn't suggest Regardie as the way to understand Crowley, but certainly for me, it was a gateway to seeing Crowley as a viable and important figure to explore in terms of the great work.
And so, then, what was your first book or first way into a Regardie and then Crowley's work? Like you say through Jung, but what was the first thing you read of Jung?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm not ashamed to admit it because I was very young, but when I was 15, 14, maybe even late 13, whenever it was that the Police album Synchronicity came out, I think that was 83, so I must have been 14 or 15. Of course, synchronicity is a term from Jung's work, and so that got me at the high school library, finding whatever Jung books I could find, and it was Man and His Symbols. The big format, sort of lots of pictures book, and so that was a seed that got planted back in my early teens. In college, I deepened that when I was majoring in psychology and stayed interested in Jung, and really focused in on it in grad school. So Jung, I got Jung that way. Regardie, again, was sort of finding him in the back of Llewellyn books on paganism. Like, here's a little ad for the Golden Dawn and the Middle Pillar. And it's sort of like, that seemed more like what I'm looking for. So I chased that rabbit hole for a while, and found Crowley pretty quickly. So Regardie's book, The Middle Pillar, was really the one that opened me up. And then I found whatever Crowley I could in the pre-internet days. This was interlibrary loan time and stuff like that. And I'm pretty sure an interlibrary loan of Magic and Theory and Practice was the first Crowley book I ever read.
Nice. And did you instantly start doing the practices, like the yoga practices, and then his rituals?
Especially ritual is where I started. I had some meditative experience. This was the summer of 93. And so within a few months of finding Crowley, I was starting my initiatory journey in the broader tradition that is represented by the Temple of the Silver Star, which I run, and also AA and the OTO. So kind of all at once that same year, pretty quickly.
Oh, wow. And then, if I am correct, is your teacher then Phyllis Seckler? Is that
right? Phyllis Seckler, also known as Sora Merrill, Meral. And she was a student of Jane Wolfe and Carl Germer at various points. And they, of course, were students of Crowley. So in AA, that's the sort of the connection there for me. But Phyllis was a huge, important person in my life, really a close friend at the end, and just a dear, dear person.
Yeah. And would you state that is that like and it's hard to say true lines from Crowley into yourself and on? Do you find that that is one of the more authentic lines to hit what Crowley was trying to actually get at?
Well, I don't speak negatively of other claimants to that, but I do feel like the work we're doing is a legitimate both administrative and initiatory channel of the original work of Crowley. So, feel pretty solid about that.
Yeah, that's a great answer. So then the real question is to kind of get back more upon yourself before we get into deeper of the Thelema and the Crowley's AA work and Crowley himself, is then did you always have a feeling of being a seeker in your youth? Did you read science fiction, fantasy, anything that like really helped your imaginatory processes spark you into the
Yeah.
grander scheme of what's going on?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. I love questions, and I love exploring what gets people's imagination fired up and sort of uh, propels them in a true will kind of direction, even if they don't realize it at the time. Because why were they so attracted to that story or that hero or that music or that book, whatever? So for me, early on, like 8, 10 ish, we're talking Tolkien and things like that, identifying with the Gandalf character as the coolest character in the book.
Yep. Yeah.
Um, so I'm sure I'm not alone in that among
Yeah.
magicians.
No.
But what was next? Well, music was next, and that may not be obviously something that people think of as being a seeking tradition, but for me, it certainly was. I know that's what I was looking for. I was looking for a way into the truth, and when you're in the flow of music, there's nothing truer than that. Uh, and so I found really through a synchronicity. Happened to be reading a record review. I was thinking about this morning. A record review of King Crimson's album, Three of a Perfect Pair. This was in 1984, and I was, just starting guitar. Found out that Robert Fripp, one of the guitarists in King Crimson, the founding guitarist in King Crimson, had started doing these workshops through his work with J.G. Bennett, who was a student of Gurdjieff, so the Fourth Way tradition. So he started doing these guitarcraft workshops, and I set off in my car when I was still 16 or so, and headed up and took my first course in that tradition with Robert. And so that's an association that's sustained all those years. But back then, that was my path. That's where I first did meditation. We start each day at the workshop with meditation. They call it sitting, and immerse ourselves in music all day. So this was when I realized the power of being dedicated to a craft and being dedicated to making ourselves a channel where music can come through. And that's not very far from saying a channel where spirit can come through, or a channel where you can connect to the HGA or something. So it was a musical language of describing what was to be a mystical path for me.
Yeah, that's it's funny you say King Crimson, because they had a huge influence on my peak of all peaks, which is the great Tool. And so
Sure.
for myself, I've said this a bunch on the channel, but I never get sick of it, is in telling people is like I felt like my brainwashing was by Tool, and they're the ones who kind of opened me into the path of falling into Crowley and the AA and the Golden Dawn, and just reading as much as I could
Interesting.
about Crowley and his work, especially because Danny Carey himself is one of the foremost holders of the first, editions of Crowley's work. So that's funny that you bring up King Crimson because of that.
Yeah, that's an interesting overlap in our origin stories there.
yeah, and it's funny because for me at all that same time, it was like I was reading Crowley and Regardi, as well as Blavatsky and Illyri and Robert Anton Wilson's work kind of all together as I was studying philosophy at that time. And so I feel like I was very lucky to study philosophy at that time, because it kind of helped keep me grounded in not only reading those things, but also my practices. I think that's one of Crowley's dictums that he writes about how important it is to not take the things that you see in your visions and your practices as real. And you know, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But be
Yeah.
skeptical of those things, because your mind can be taken away if it's not trained well enough through your will practices, right?
Yeah. Or you just fall victim to self-delusion. You decide that the first vision is deemed to be the ultimate vision,
Yeah.
and then a person can stop growing because they decided they don't need to anymore. They've already arrived because they had the big, you know, um,
The big
I
boom
see the
that.
universe is all one, and then no need to do actual daily work anymore, right? And then sure enough, stagnation happens.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I find it fascinating that then how does one now become the head of, what you would say you're the head of the temple? You founded the temple that leads then into the AA as well?
So yeah, I'm the term is Prolocutor, fourth
Thank you.
speaker, um, of the Temple of the Silver Star, and we are an outgrowth of a tradition that is a Golden Dawn rooted tradition that's been uninterrupted since the Alpha and Omega split off of the Golden Dawn, and that's been active as its own thing since 2008. So coming up on 20 years soon, and then I work in the administration of AA, having taken that over from Sora Merrill, Phyllis, along with the other members of the administrative triad, as it's called. And I've been involved in OTO all these years too, as a bishop, and Sovereign Grand Inspector General is the very Masonic sounding office.
Nice. Did you go through masonry as well, or did you skip that one?
I'm a Master Mason, and I did that. I did those Blue Lodge degrees in the mid 2000s, right before Temple of the Silver Star started, and at that point, I just had to economize energy and focus to be actually running organizations as opposed to participating much. So I haven't really been active in Masonry, but I am still Dew's current Master Mason.
Yeah, nice. So then the question was, how did you, as a young Tolkien King Crimson seeker, from your falling into young and Gregardi, then all of a sudden become such a prevalent force in this Western esoteric tradition?
I don't know, but uh, and now I'll try to figure it out and answer your
Yeah,
question.
let's do it.
I
Let's figure it out together.
there'll be an autobiography someday where I try to piece these things together. But well, I jokingly sometimes say just keep doing the work and don't die, and you'll get somewhere, But so that was step one, or step 1 and 2.
Yeah.
So what happened was, what the best way to talk about this probably is that I was listening to the universe, in terms of how things in my life were going. Right about the time I was a probationer of AA, and in another degree, in another form of the work that is very thresholdy also. Things that used to work just stopped working. Work life, home life, everything was just not working the way it had. And this was confusing to me because I've basically had a pretty linear kind of life where I planned something and I did that thing and it worked, and then I did the next thing. But this was things were sort of clearly not working. So that's when I moved with my wife and baby son at the time, from Indiana, where we'd been going to school, to Sacramento, California, which was where my wife's family was, my first wife. And that put me within an hour and a half of Phyllis Eckler, who lived in Oroville. And so I was already a member of an order that she was running, but she wanted me to come up, and we'd met once, and she wanted me to come up and do monthly ritual work with her in the organization. So this started with me and Phyllis and one other person in her dining room starting to do ritual in 1997. Wow. And she died in 2004. So that remaining set of years there, we were group building and organization building. And when she died, she wanted me to carry on, and so we did. And so it was kind of by a strange sequence that I got to that place. Kept immersing myself in the work and my, doing my own advancements in AA and such. And it worked like it's supposed to work, which is you have knowledge and conversation, you have more concrete, crystallized awareness of what your true will is. You start to build a life in order for that true will to have space to thrive. And when you do that, what tends to happen is that people start to say, oh, this is a person who's got a certain voice in this work. And that really first sort of culminated externally in terms of writing the book, Living Thelema, after doing the podcast for a few years. So that's kind of that's the real threshold point for my public work, at least.
Yeah, it's fascinating that you moved to a space that then allowed you to meet this person, Phyllis Seckler, that to get in, kind of integrate into those things. Yeah, that's amazing. What was it that drew you to this tradition instead of others then?
Another great question. I think Thelema for me immediately struck me as a tradition that was powerful and deep and had plenty of tools for magic and mysticism, work, but also did not want you to stop being skeptical and as I often put it, to check your brain at the door when coming into the church. You keep your brain and you can be in there and be a thinking person who's critically evaluating your experiences and making up your own mind about things. And there's not some sort of belief system you're expected to take in a pre-digested way and say, here's this fairy tale about how the world is, and you have to believe it to be in this church,
Yeah.
At least that's not the way I think it should be. And I think most places, Thelema doesn't operate like that. And so, I think that was it, really. It was a way to have depth and mystery in life, but also be thoughtful about it and kind of have a balanced approach like that.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that other traditions could be applied that way. It's just this one is intended that way, I think.
Yeah. No, I hear that. And that's there is something beautiful about how Crowley wraps in two sides of a coin that are constantly at war. And I view that to be the liberal and the conservative, like the tradition, and then blowing past that tradition and trying to create something new. And then we see that in our day and age where it's this continual Hegelian dialectic, this fight of this left versus right. And I think that is kind of the plight of our own mismanagement of our soul. I know that may be kind of abstract, but there's something to that. And so what was it? Can you explain why is that so important to have tradition, but yet be able to see past it towards the future?
Simple analogy: if you want to be a great poet, you better learn the alphabet first.
Yeah. Nice.
But if all you do is write the alphabet, you won't be a great poet. You've got to take the building blocks and understand them, and then this is not a new concept, but learn how to express yourself in traditional ways, and then learn which rules to break, and learn where to be transgressive and break out of boxes that maybe had been invisible to previous generations and such. And that's just, I think, how human evolution happens. But there are cases, of course, of people being sort of outsiders to a tradition and blowing doors open by coming in and doing something that's just revolutionary because of who they are, how they're doing it, that may never do the equivalent of learning the alphabet, in that tradition. But I think most of the time we gotta do the grunt work of learning the foundations and then break out of it.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Especially in this day and age where it's like everyone wants to throw away tradition that's on one side, or the other side's all like, we can't move too fast and we got to only hold ourselves from how we got here. And I think it's a good meshing of the two to harmonize our own mind and mind, body, soul. So we can, I think that's when, personally, that's when your vessel is prepared for conversation, as you know, analogously would be with the holy guardian angel, because you'd think that the holy guardian angel would want you to be a well-rounded individual, right?
I think what we do is, by virtue of being well-rounded, we come into the fullness of who we are, and that attracts, that enables us to tune in to the voice of the angel that's always been there, trying to get us to listen correctly. So we don't have to go somewhere we're not. We don't have to be something we're not. We just have to be ourselves fully. So that comes back to correcting for imbalances, understanding those lesser developed areas that we may not be naturally drawn to in ourselves or in our development. And the systems I work with, I think, are very good at doing that, and that kind of gets our antenna in the right place to hear the voice, you know.
Yeah, no, that's a good answer. What do you find that you first went through your own dark night of the soul before you became able to put your pieces back together, like your own blackening, the negredo, before the whitening could happen?
Yeah, part of that, the initial phase of that was what I was describing earlier, in terms of like doing the big move west, and having that be in a place of considerable discomfort, you know, with how things were. The next one was coming right up on my um, knowledge and conversation retirement, where uh, I've told this story at the end of The Way of the Will in print, so I would direct people to that for a fuller discussion here. But it's and in some videos, but basically, Phyllis died in May of 2004. My father had cancer, had been diagnosed with cancer, and was going to die, and I knew that, and he knew that. So I was, as an example, I was out visiting him when I got the word that Phyllis had died, so I couldn't be with her then. And then the rest of that year, sort of my marriage was falling apart, partly because our paths were diverging around spirituality or lack thereof and such. And so no harm, no foul, but the paths were diverging. And so I got to that fall. My father died in October, and you know, I'd lost my bearings there. I was doing okay, you know, psychologically and professionally and stuff, but in terms of the stakes planted in the ground of losing a teacher and losing my father, and seeing that I was losing the marriage, and our son was young at the time, so that has its own heartbreak, you know.
Yeah.
And so I kind of threw it to the HGA, kind of the Holy Guardian Angel, in case people don't know that term. It's just a generic term we use for that personal divine being that we connect with. I kind of threw it to the HGA for, you know, I don't know how to figure this shit out, but the guy on the other side of this retirement will. So, and this is a magical retirement, of course, for those listening who may not know the term, but I'm going to go in this cave, and you know, when I come out, I sure hope I'll be smarter, you know, so, or you know, more able to navigate these trials. So that was definitely the Dark Knight equivalent there.
So then that leads me to so you were already doing your magical practice before your retirement, obviously, because you have to go through the paths of the tree of life, because that's how the system works, is as you're going through certain initiations up the pathway, you have to go through certain veils. And upon doing that, you finally reach the knowledge and conversation, which on the tree of life, if I'm mistaken, is the Tippereth on that sphere. Is that correct? Right. And
right, that's where the sort of the marriage happens.
Yeah, the marriage happens. And then at the same time, you're doing your magical rituals, right? Your practices, your meditation, as well as like the LBRPs and all of the different banishing and invoking rituals, do you find that then those banishing and invoking rituals, the hexagram and the pentagram, were part of the complete breakdown of your world at that time?
Do you mean like the cause of it, or
Not cause, but they helped kind of cleanse the space so your own sphere had the ability to get rid of, so to speak, those things that weren't going to be in line with your own higher spheres?
One basic answer to that question is absolutely our excuse me, our daily work of what we might call hygienic ritual, like the lesser rituals with pentagram and hexagram and such, enable us to stay tuned in as best we can, and to be not distracted as much by other inner and outer forces. I think it's just a protective space to be in, and it's only the consistent practice of those daily rituals, I think, that within this tradition that keeps us in that space. So we can, if there's 10,000 voices in the room, I'm using the metaphor of the voice, but I hope people understand we're not speaking literally. But if there's 10,000 voices in the room, striving to hear the one voice that you need to be listening to is trickier. So anything magically or mystically that we can do to clear out that space and let that silence invite in the voice we need, be it music or spirit or the HGA, however we think of it. So I'd worked through the AA grades to Dominus Liminis, and then what we call Adeptus Minor without. Phyllis had actually already confirmed my 5-6, but I wanted to do the intermediate work. That I didn't want to just take it as she was saying, okay, you made it. I know from these diaries yeah. I've been reading of yours and everything, you're there. But I did come back through to make sure I was dotting all the I's and did all the practices, and got to that place where all the structure of all the ritual I'd done over the years and all the meditation, basically everything in the AA system, it's designed to bring you to the place where you're kind of a balanced being waiting for that light to hit you the right way for knowledge and conversation. And that's the timing of the retirement.
Nice. So then all this leads us into the question, and if what is magic? And it's a very loaded question, because the easy one is the Dio and Fortune Crowley's Science and Art of Causing Change and Conformity of Will. Would that be your way of also saying what magic is?
Yeah, I don't have any improvements on that basic definition, but I do think it's useful to think of magic and mysticism together, to understand that one is sort of extroverted, action-oriented, additive process of symbol gathering and attention focusing in order to kind of actively create some change. Whereas the mysticism side is the inner silencing to allow the mystery to come to you, and to be sure you're listening well and focusing well. So the mystical side of it, the meditation practice, the yoga practices in the AA system, become the tools of focus and concentration and filtering out that you then can bring to your magic. But it's the two together that need to be there, so that you have sort of the extroverted and introverted, or active and passive, if you want to use those terms, sides of it.
Yeah, no, that's a great way of stating that. So then why didn't you, it sounds like you've never went into the Golden Dawn. Is that correct?
Well, I did after fashion, because when I was talking about Temple of the Silver Star, we are a continuation of a Golden Dawn lineage.
Of the Alpha and Omega.
So, right. Through the work of Paul Foster Case and others in the intermediate decades. But so what we're doing now with the Temple of the Silver Star is a bringing together of being in service to AA and having that connection, but also an unbroken Golden Dawn lineage. So it's very much and a lot of depth psychology built in too. So it's a fusion of those traditions in a lot of ways.
Okay, so then
Synthesis.
yeah, that's a good explanation of how that kind of works through it. And if those who don't know out there was a massive disruption in the Golden Dawn in the early 1900s, with Crowley and Mathers taking off and doing their own thing, and a large portion of the more traditionalists in the Golden Dawn, like William Butler Yeats and the like, did not want Crowley to be initiated into the higher levels, but Crowley and Mathers went and did that. And that kind of led to then Crowley taking off when he came back, and then the massive schism. Seems like a lot of egos going on, and then all of a sudden that order, breaking apart, and then Crowley going and doing his own thing with his equinoxes and creating of the AA into Thelema and his writing of the Book of the Law. And so
Exactly.
my question is, I just want to know what you think about that, because it seems like that's a massive piece of the golden thread, because I'm continually trying to figure out this golden thread through time. And everyone always wants to state, everyone being myself included, being all like, well, it all started in Mesopotamia and Sumeria with Enki and Enlil, and this tradition of Mithraism or Orphism or Pythagoreanism, and there's this tradition that goes through time, Rosicrucians and the Platonists, and all of a sudden you get the Golden Dawn from Freemasonry. And I just kind of want, for myself as a student of the tradition, I'm just trying to understand from, it seems like a wonderful gentleman and mentor and master himself. Like, what do you think about that massive schism, this blowing up, and all of a sudden this fragmentation of pieces?
Well, I think that's inevitable, and over time, over history, expectable and almost universal in any tradition. Things hive off, or you get schisms, or you get heresies, or things that separate people out into different approaches. So the interesting thing about the Golden Dawn schism in 1900, which resulted in Crowley and Mathers kind of putting the stake in the ground for the Alpha and Omega branch of that, is that came to the U.S. pretty vibrantly. And so prominent U.S. occultists of the early 20th century, like Paul Foster Case, for example, participated in that, and that led to builders of the Adytum and the groups that have flowed from that, including us. So it's the thread that seems pretty vibrant to me in my lived experience, and so I can't look back on that schism of 1900 and see that as a negative. It's just, maybe it's like a seed pod exploding or something. Things land places, and some of them land in the right soil and take off, and others don't. But that's just evolution too.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I think I think just like the cyclical nature of our planet, of an individual cycle and all these different things, institutions which are made by man also have that same cyclical nature. Like every great civilization explodes every at its 250 plus year. That's why maybe we're finding America to be imploding on itself, because it's a great empire, and all great empires have to change. Even though Philip K. Dick says the empire never ended, it just changes names. It's a similar, very fascinating thing that it kind of started to change names from the Golden Dawn, because Dione Fortune and her stuff is different than, is that right, than the Alpha Omega?
Yeah, right.
Line?
She had her own separate thread too.
And then, so what's fascinating to me is that I think Crowley's equinoxes are so fascinating. And everybody that he was working with on those things, I wonder about how a lot of the more traditional Golden Dawn guys that I talk to say kind of poo-poo the AA and Thelema due to one reason or another of their distaste for Crowley. And then they state that the Golden Dawn's tradition as in its initiatory structures of the tree are whole and in and of themselves. But I've also heard such magical guys in the sphere, gentlemen themselves, and teachers like Jason Louv. I've heard him talk about how the AA actually continues on the initiation structures, and that the Golden Dawn itself stopped when it reached the 5-6, or it stopped at one point, and then the AA takes it. Is that what kind of truth is to that?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that Crowley's work, it's not all that he focused on, but he added a layer of deeper understanding about what happens after knowledge and conversation, that there is the moving from adepthood to mastery, the crossing the abyss and attaining to the supernal grades, if you think of it in a tree of life way. I think that was an expansion and a set of insights that he had that augmented what the Golden Dawn was doing. In terms of the bickering between Golden Dawn threads and Thelemic threads, not threads, people. It's the oldest thing in the book. I mean, I've lived my whole magical life hearing this sort of stuff. The Golden Dawn people saying the Thelema is just crazy Crowley doing drugs and sex and getting in his narcissistic thing he did, so don't bother with that. And then the Thelema people looking at the Golden Dawn and seeing it as kind of calcified, crusty, old stuff that needs to be overturned and shaken up a bit. So, and both of these are stereotypes, of course.
Right.
I think people want to feel like they made the right choice. And so it's easy to, if we're not paying attention to our projections, it's easy to just find a bad guy that's doing it wrong, and feel better.
Yeah. It's a good answer. It's very PC answer, but I love the answer nonetheless. Because I think it's fascinating on Crowley basically taking the individual and trying to do this Ubermensch style Nietzschean kind of explosion. Do you feel like Crowley was still kind of holding on to his Christian ethos?
That's a great question. I think yes and no, and I think he was holding onto it in a way that became very effective, in that he was taking these Christian symbols that he'd grown up with and, to my eyes, redeeming them in terms of giving them a utility for the new work to be done. In other words, if we believed that the earth and our physical bodies and our sexuality were evil, if we were taught that, then why not take a symbol like the Whore of Babylon and say, wait a minute, this is a wholesome, life-affirming archetype of receptivity and joyful living and powerful, tantric immersion in the ecstasy of life, And what if the great beast is not some big destructive thing, as it would seem to be to a Christian who was fearing the end of their era? What if the great beast is simply a symbol for the active, expressive, powerful, life-affirming juice that's going to be, available more when we stop condemning ourselves and our lives and our bodies and all that? So if Crowley hadn't had those archetypes from the Christian era to work with, I think his system would be less powerful.
Yeah.
What that does mean, though, on the downside is that it's easier for people to misunderstand. And if you're programmed in kind of a Christian symbolic mindset, I don't mean programmed to be pejorative there, but if that's what you got, you're going to hear great beast, Whore of Babylon is going to be like, holy shit, how these evil people worshiping these evil things,
Yes.
But it's just not that,
Yeah, and then so that leads to the definitions and the differentiation between the exoteric and the esoteric. I would love to hear your take on the similarities and differences between those two things and how they relate to what we're talking about.
At this point in history, there's not too many exoteric explorers of Thelema or proponents of Thelema. I think it's just the esotericists that have even been drawn to thinking about it. So I don't know that we can really, I don't think there's been enough time in the Thelemic era even see what a purely exoteric Thelema might look like. I suspect there won't be one. I suspect it will be an influence of the esoteric side that just is woven in with society. And I do not expect a Thelemic church on every corner and, et cetera. With Christianity, I think you can easily see the way those two threads separate. The exoteric broad base, come to the church on Sunday and do your thing, and then the smaller community within a Christian tradition that might have a mystical approach, and there's examples of those people over the years, or people who are more interested in the esoteric exploration of it. So pretty easy to see those distinctions on the Christian side. I think we're just waiting to see how that goes with Thelema.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. What I feel like esotericism has an issue right now, and I feel like what it is that it's becoming mainstream. And so there's a lot of these people who are trying to read the symbols exoterically through an esoteric lens, which seems kind of ass backwards to me. And so you get a lot of individuals who aren't part of a tradition or haven't studied the language and symbols and are reading the esoteric through the exoteric. And so what I mean by that is like there's this occult boom going on in both Hollywood and in America and all over the world. And that I feel like people forget that the esoteric means by a select few. And that's not some aristocratic select few, but it's just those who can see beneath the narrative of things. And so it's like I feel like it's as much as I want people, especially through my channel, I'm trying to be like, hey, there are these signs and symbols and narratives and mythologies that are going on in all of our stories. And upon that, if you have the ability to see these things, you can kind of deprogram yourself from the narratives and then build your own individual off of those things. Do you think the esoteric should then just stay esoteric is kind of what I'm asking.
I think truth should be available to as many people as can get themselves to it. So in that sense, it should be available. It will always be a subset of people. Just like anyone, take any population of people, there's going to be some people who just want to go deeper and others who don't. They're just not drawn to it, or whatever theory you might have to character differences, or of course, it's the real world, and so some people don't have the resources to have time and energy to do more than get through the day.
Yeah.
And so just life seems to separate out who's going to be able to follow certain tracks if they're interested in them and such. So I do think, what you're saying about the sort of the podcast, YouTube, internet world in terms of this kind of thing, something I thought of while you're talking there. In some ways, we could almost view this sort of internet culture side of this and the broad base of it and the sort of the ubiquity of it as the exoteric expression of all of this stuff. It's, instead of go to the church on the corner, it's go to your screen.
Right.
And there's a huge difference between, no offense to those of us who've done podcasts like you and I, or, or YouTube things. There's a big difference between doing that and being in an esoteric society that is functioning privately and training people as we have for millennia without doing it facing the public. And so when the easier it becomes to go on someone's screen and say, here's esoteric truth, the harder it may be for people to see what's actually happening out of sight, but very vibrantly.
Yeah, I love that. And that led me to thinking about what Mark Stavish brought up when I had him on, was that publishing is not practicing. And I find that it's very not easy to get published, especially by good publishers, but it's easy just to write a book and put it out there as this should be read and followed. And I kind of feel like two sides is that A, it's a distraction for those who can't critically think, and all of a sudden they just take on these things. But at the same time, it is something that helps. I think sometimes that when it's like culling the herd, that you shall not cast pearls before swine. So if the true teachings stay hidden because truth is something that's not an objective, something you can hold like a noun, but like the Greek term that I always really like is aletheia. It is truth unconceals itself to you. So while reading Crowley, I feel like he writes on so many different levels that when I first picked up the Book of Thoth, which was one of my first Crowley books I started or tried to read, I was out of my depths. And so I had to go to things like Manly P. Hall and Rigardi and all these other things. And then throughout the ages, I can pick it, through time now, I've got more of a language set and now I can understand it better. And all of a sudden, like today and through the last how many years, I'm all like, this book is it just gives me so much. Instead of a lot of other things, which it's like, it feels like it's LARPing, if you know what I mean. It's people are cosplaying esotericists and magicians as an identity instead of something that should help deconstruct your persona so you can be authentic, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think with the visibility of say online personalities and things like that, I really do think it has replaced the kind of legitimacy that previously would have been in the hands of the priesthood of whatever tradition. There's an assumed legitimacy because this person is even doing this thing, because they're even in this role. They have answers and they have some truth about this. So someone shows up on our screen at this stage in history, we are, I think, pretty trained to believe they have something of value and that is important and that they know what they're doing, and so it takes a lot to just question that and move past that assumption and really get more discerning about it.
Yeah, that's true. So then what do you feel about initiation? And this is something that's really important to me, actually, because I've always, besides living in Colorado in that area, I am a born and bred farm boy. So I've always been far away from major cities. And even in the more bigger city I live near now, there is no Golden Dawn. There is no like temple. There's no AA or anything like that. So for people who can't go, there is the Masons in my area, which I do feel eventually I will, apply to become a brother. But at the same time, I feel like, do you feel like you can be self-initiated, even though that term is a poor term?
There is a value in initiatory experience wherever we find it. And you can't always predict what's going to be available to an individual outside of an organization. We don't have, vision into that for someone's personal life. There's certainly examples of people who have attained outside of traditional initiatory systems. I do think there is something that can only be obtained through initiatory traditions, and that is, I know this will seem like a truism, but it's whatever is available in that system uniquely. You simply won't know that energetic mystery of a particular initiatory tradition without going through it. And maybe that's not the right thing for you, but if it is, it'd be really good for you to find it and do it, because there's an empowerment in that. For me personally, I can't imagine my life without having formal initiatory work. I simply don't think it would have been an effective path for me to not do that. So I think that sort of parallel to what we're saying about the broader world of the internet, I think the danger is that people find a book that says this is self-initiation into the XYZ and don't ever realize that it might not be the same thing as they would have encountered, and they they don't have the basis for comparison. So I just don't want people to be misled or miss an opportunity more than anything else. I don't want them to miss a chance to gain something because they've decided they've already done it themselves.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's very true, especially with my own martial arts instruction, on how I had an amazing teacher and teachers, and I would have never been able to do it by just learning on YouTube.
Yeah.
There's no possible way. It's an embodied practice that you need somebody to look at you and to show you the movement and to help put you in the positions. As much as I know it's very similar, if not the same thing, with people being all like, well, how did you visualize the Archangel Michael in your LBRP? Is everything going on exactly? You need somebody to crack the so-called whip of your own delusional state that you're doing it correctly. If that,
there's that. And then there's as I'm sure you've experienced in the martial arts context, seeing how a master does something, a certain movement, say, anyone maybe could sort of approximate the movement, but it's the how that carries some energy and the way the whole person does the thing. So when you work with initiatory groups in person, imagine all the little things that we might take as inconsequential, like how you do a certain gesture, how you hold a magical implement, how you direct force with that implement. To take the martial arts parallel, that's the kind of how does the master do it that you can learn in an initiatory context that would be unavailable otherwise.
Yeah, nice. That's a good answer. So then I guess it's time to get into, and I want to help through putting these videos out. There's so much nonsense about Aleister Crowley, the Great Beast, and most people don't know that his mother is the one who gave him that name at a young age. So, and then he just took that because he knows the idiom and dictum that there's no such thing as bad press. And I think he is one of the number one realizers of that thing. And so can you help me dispel a few Crowley myths? First off, Crowley is not a Satanist, nor did he do black magic. Give me some pointers on that.
Sure. You will find references to Satan in Crowley's work, but you have to understand that, like some of these other terms we mentioned, Great Beast, Babylon, all that sort of stuff, he just wasn't using that in the same way that a Christian would see it, or a person in a Judeo-Christian leaning culture, who's been exposed to how many devil movies over the decades. So you have to understand that he's not whatever he's into and into suggesting that you might want to try. It's not, there's this actual evil entity that is sort of like the anti-God, and we call it Satan, and that's what we worship. It's just not it. It's just not. And so anyone who thinks that or says that, it is misunderstanding the system. There were people who will say, of course Crowley was a Satanist, because look how he's talking about Satan here in terms of his own HGA or whatever, connections like that. And that's missing the context I was just describing, that this is, you can't describe it as satanic to a person who's steeped in a Judeo-Christian type understanding of that term and expect them to understand what you're talking about. It's just confusing. It adds to the problem to talk about it that way.
Yeah. And so then it leads to a few examples of him talking about sacrificing babies. I know what that means, but can you explain to the audience what it would mean through this lens?
Yeah, Crowley did not harm people physically, advocate for doing that, or anything like that. The reference to sacrificing, I think the specific quote in Magic and Theory and Practice in the footnote is sacrificing male children, and he was talking about masturbation.
Yeah.
So this was just code, because in those days you couldn't talk about masturbation, but you could talk about sacrificing babies, because that is just so beyond the pale that I guess censors wouldn't even think of it as being something they needed to censor, but sex was too much,
Yeah.
So that's that one.
Yeah, nice. So then I need a little more understanding of this. So the Abbey of Thelema, which was created by him and then owned by Jimmy Page and a few other really famous people, correct?
You're blending a couple things. The Abbey of Thelema was in Italy. You're thinking of Boleskine House in Scotland, which Jimmy Page
Thank
owned.
you. Nice. And actually, I think I've made that mistake for many years. So yes, I do know that. Nice. And so Abbey of Thelema was where a lot of the famous Hollywood types would come and then learn, or was that Boleskine?
The Abbey of Thelema did attract one prominent example from Hollywood would be my sort of grand teacher, Jane Wolfe, who was a silent film actress, and then in 1920 went to Cefalù, Sicily,
Yeah.
where the Abbey of Thelema was, and worked
Yeah.
with Crowley there, and then came back to Hollywood to work with Agape Lodge of OTO down there with figures like Jack Parsons and such. So is that there is sort of an axis between the Jane Wolfe connection at Cefalù and then the Hollywood scene with the OTO's activity in the 40s and 50s, mostly in Hollywood or in LA broadly.
Yeah. And then, so a lot of people want to kind of throw him into the drug addict category, but I think they forget about what was going on in those times is that you could just go get opium and different drugs like at the pharmacy, most likely.
And
right?
would be prescribed, he was prescribed opiates for asthma, which was common at the time. Now, I do think he probably made some unhealthy choices with substances over the years. So, not advocating anybody try to copy that. That actually leads me to a larger point that's worth making about the Thelemic tradition. I think it's hard for people coming from other world traditions or even watching world traditions where the founder is seen as a holy person whose life is to be modeled after.
Yeah.
That simply is not what we're doing here. The only modeling after Crowley that we would advocate would be look at the system that he tried to work himself and try to work that yourself, for yourself in your way, not like Crowley did, not because we're trying to be like Crowley. So that's another misunderstanding that makes people point to his obvious personality foibles. He's, could be a jerk, of course, like anybody. But I think if we actually personally knew the founders of all world religions, we'd come to the same conclusion. They were humans who could be jerks.
Yep. No, I completely agree with that, especially because a lot of the prophets of the ages like Jesus, Krishna, Buddha, let alone all the other ones, there's been hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years between them, and all of the bad things most likely were burnt. So we can only see the avatar of a new age.
To the extent that even that these figures were actual people, or that what's encoded about them in the system is about an actual person versus some mythologized thing, But Crowley's too new to have a mythologized thing. He didn't levitate on top of a mountain, and we don't have that kind of stuff because he's 20th century. So it's very easy for people to get stuck on knowing his documented personality foibles and seeing that as a reflection on what Thelema must be like.
Yeah. And from your angle, do you think Crowley thought of himself as a prophet?
Sure, especially if we understand prophet in the sense of somebody who, for one reason or another, has vision into the way things are going in the world, just to put it totally colloquially. Somebody who's, I see where these threads are coming together. I see where the river's flowing here. I think this is what this next period of humanity is going to maybe be like. And I think he nailed that. He kind of predicted a lot of I don't mean predicted in a funny way, like
No. Yeah.
Nostradamus sort of, and in 1923 there shall be, but more like just getting the vibe of where things were going and talking about it in ways that were fairly mystical and powerful.
Yeah, no, I think it's important because most people don't understand. Again, they see it only through an outsider lens. They don't understand that Crowley wasn't trying to teach people to be him. He was trying to teach people the path of the mystic magician who the path of a priest who is trying to have that theurgic or that divine ecstatic vision so they could be their wholest, most authentic self, to
Exactly.
become their own Ubermensch, right?
Yes, to discover their basic nature and live it out vibrantly and fully, and in the way that is only appropriate for them, not like be like Crowley, certainly.
Yeah. And then it leads to the idea of, I think, a common misconception in one of his greatest quotes, or the greatest sayings in all of Thelema, is "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." And what they do is they don't then say the rest of it, love is the law, love under will. Every man and every woman is a star, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. A huge misunderstanding on all of those, of course, in the public eye. The thing to know is that, the basic sort of archetypal misunderstanding going back even to the 20s with the tabloid press at the time was that "do what thou wilt" means do whatever you want. It's really not about that at all. It's the opposite. It is tune in your personal will to the divine will that is within you as an expression of universal divine will. That's the true will. It would make far more sense if people heard this as "do the will of God shall be the whole of the law,"
Yes.
because
Yes.
that's really much more like the implication. I'm not suggesting we change the phrase, but for a non-Thelemite to kind of get what it's more like, I think that phrase, it gets closer.
Yeah. And then so people understand even what Thelema means, in geometric language, which is what he's speaking from, it equates to 93, which equates to will. Am I correct?
Yep. And agape, love.
And agape love, exactly, which goes back to then that is the coded language of even then "do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, love under." And so I think that is a big mistake on a lot of people's parts, and I don't like how then it's equated to the Temple of Set and Satanism and Anton LaVeyan kind of things. And so most of the time I'm trying to tell people that Crowley and Anton LaVey they were never friends. There was no interrelation between those two, really, right?
Yeah. So LaVey was, I think, he was a showman.
Yeah.
I think he vibed on the philosophical, cultural implications of magic, and took that. I've never been a member of the Church of Satan, but my understanding is that that whole thing was less about a religious perspective on Satan being an actual deity, but more like a self-empowerment cult in a way. And so to equating Crowley's broader work with the kind of the special thing that LaVey did with it in his life is really a mistake.
Yeah. And do you think that Crowley, Crowley wrote the Book of the Law, and he initially threw it out as kind of nonsense. He didn't really understand it, if I'm not mistaken, and then came back to it years later and finally realized what he had, right?
Took him a while to digest it. This is often the case when we have a personal breakthrough. Sometimes we don't really realize what it means until we've got some distance and perspective on it, which could be years. So yeah, it took him a bit of time. You can even tell from some of the early Equinox volumes starting in 1908. If you follow that on through the later ones, his later writings, you can sort of see Thelema. You can see him actively coming to terms with Thelema as being an important part of the system, and then the Book of the Law and the whole dispensation there. Some of his earlier writings sound like he just is reconfiguring the Golden Dawn system his way, and wanting to weed out some of the problems he saw there. But it takes some time to see Thelema coming into his mind over time as something that should be central.
Yeah. And then from your angle, and I want your opinion as well as what you maybe think Crowley thought, what were the problems with the Golden Dawn system as it was crumbling?
I can paraphrase Crowley pretty well on this if I say that, or interpret his feelings, I think, by saying that in his experience with the Golden Dawn as it was at the time, progress through degrees was very it wasn't initiatory. It was too much based on, it wasn't legitimately initiatory. It was too much based on memorize these writings in this paper, wait maybe a certain amount of time, pay the money. Maybe it's who you know, maybe it's your social standing that helps you, you know. So just a lot of kind of gross social stuff there that it had nothing to do with true initiation. So I think he was a bit disgusted with that and wanted to make sure that whatever he did was going to be a system that was actually initiatory in function, and took out those sort of social considerations. So that's why the AA is a one-to-one model, teacher student, and aside from a few early temple initiations, there's not a group context. You just work with your teacher, and takes out the whole thing he didn't like.
Yeah, and a part of that line is that Mathers in the Golden Dawn thought he, with the other two, Wolcott and Woodman, they were in touch with the secret chiefs of that time.
That was the claim,
right?
Yeah.
And then Mathers thought that then only he himself was in touch with that. And then even Mathers to Crowley thought he himself was only in touch with that. And so
Tale as old as time.
Tale as old as time. That's what I'm saying. And so it's fascinating to think then, did Crowley think that he was actually in touch with independent entities or beings in a different dimension or sphere or realm or higher level on the tree? How would you help me parse that out?
You know, you can hear him talk about this in different ways, in different parts of his different times in his life. Early on, it was much more, as he would describe it, as a philosophical materialist, where these are really just parts of our brains that we're activating in a convenient way by using these names and grimoires and such. But I think as he came to a more mature understanding of what Thelema means to him and what his reception of the Book of the Law meant, and Iwas as his HGA and guiding principle of the Aeon and so on, I think it became much more about these are spiritual beings that exist beyond the normal earthly realm, and certainly not simply aspects of the mind, only aspects of the mind.
Yeah. And it's this either or, like Aristotelian syllogisms that kind of get us caught into it has to be one or the other, right?
Right.
Yeah. And then so it would be fascinating to talk about, and this is something I definitely want to hear your statement on, is especially since Rigardi was one of the first people that you read before you got into Crowley, and in his Middle Pillar, I believe that's the book where he has separate subjects on the psychology of the mind and then and actual magic. And I always like to say that it can be both, that magic is both a psychological aspect and also there's something else going on.
Yeah. This one drives me crazy, frankly, and because it's been the single most misunderstood thing about my work over the years. I finally found a way to talk about this more cogently, I think. That is that if I were a mathematician and I were reflecting on the mathematical principles of the Tree of Life, I don't think anyone would come along and say, you're reducing magic to numbers. But I think people know that I'm a psychologist and that I am talking about magic sometimes from the psychological perspective. And then it's like, oh, he just thinks magic is psychology, or it's all in the head. And it's, I've never said that. I never believed that. I never actually talked about it that way. And I adhere to a Kabbalistic psychology system that insists upon transpersonal and trans-egoic realities, So I couldn't resist a chance to rant for a few seconds about that.
No, please. That's why you're here. I want to hear all of that, especially because I've trained in phenomenology and trained in philosophy. And if anybody who knows how the history of philosophy has gone due to Cartesianism in the ratchet Enlightenment periods, they've separated the body and mind, and it's led us to a lot of problems and schisms with our own personal identity and individual understanding of what a soul and a body are. And so I think that one of the main problems of what you're just talking about is that massive problem of what modernity has done to our thinking, that they're separate sources. I just love to hear your take on like modernity, the Enlightenment, subject object dissolution here.
Well, I'll talk about it in the way that I experience most directly, which is that I'm training people to advance toward knowledge and conversation in one organization or another. And I get asked all the time, well, are these external beings? Is the HTA your higher self, or is it an external entity, and so on? Again, of course, either or, right? It's a black and white thing in a lot of people's perception. And so I think one of the central truths that I eventually came to with my own experience was you'll know when you get there what it is for you, and it doesn't help you to define it in advance. I mean, if you'd never fallen in love, would a definition of love help you?
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know what people want. I guess it's to feel like their quest has a more definite quality to it, and somehow having a definite sense from a teacher of, oh no, you're just activating this part of your brain, or no, it's definitely this external deity you need to connect to. Maybe that is helpful, but it's not. Maybe it feels helpful, but I don't think it actually is helpful. I think people lose track of the key, which is you will define your own experience once you have it, in every sense, and every day you live, just like always. So don't front load, especially things of this importance, with certainly with someone else's definition of what it is.
Yeah, especially because this is a practice for your remembering of knowledge, basically, in that Platonic sense, right?
Right.
Yeah,
that's one good way of putting it.
Yeah, and I find it fascinating, even with my own experience of, I've put aside entheogens a long time ago because, as we all are young kids, for me, I was a farm kid, straight lacer. So it wasn't until my early college years where I finally was able to break free from my larval state and the Timothy Leary biocomputer type of thing. But it's one of those things I will never forget, because of those who have never done it will never know. And those who have done it may not be able to put words to it. But once you have that feeling, it's something you're continually trying to strive after. So why I like Timothy Leary's work so much, into Robert Anton Wilson and John C. Lilly, these guys, is because they talk about how the caterpillar doesn't speak butterfly language, but the butterfly remembers what the caterpillar experienced. And in that, you must go through the thresholds of dying. It doesn't have to be physically, right? You're trying to mimic the physical death pattern so you can become reborn. And it's one of those, and I feel like the reason I bring it up is because what you were just talking about really reminds me of that, of you can't tell somebody what it feels like to feel higher states of existence. They have to feel it for themselves. So I remember I went through a deep stage of, I had the never-ending, a supposed me had a never-ending hypothetical baggie of DMT, and it was one of those things that that you take it and it's a remembrance and it's a feeling, and you're like, oh, I forgot. It was that's what was so telling. Whatever I experienced when I traveled interdimensionally or whatever is whatever, but the biggest feeling was the mercurial essence of the feeling of remembering. And I think there's something to that I think also, when you're going through your rituals and your practices, it's not as, a 747 slamming itself into the side of your home and all of a sudden you blast off, but it's as Jung wrote in his Kundalini yoga book, it's you're now making the steps back to this place that you can sustain instead of the big up and down.
Right. I tend to use the term infrastructure for that. You build the structure that allows you to do something reliably, repeatedly, safely, and certainly you can always capitalize on those peak moments of insight, but only if you've got the structure in place.
Yeah. And for me, I think for some reason, Tool gave me a structure that I didn't ever know I had because of I went through and took a large dose of something, and then all of a sudden, my whole life changed upside down, and it was like the feeling I had. So when I was a young kid, I really liked mythology and magic and these things, but not in the way that I see it now. Loved The Hobbit, and then that for me it was I was a big Dan Brown guy because that was just my age. I was like, there is some secrets going on, as well as then superheroes and all these things. So I always was trying to the stupid thing of like, oh, I could be Wolverine and eventually my claws will come out of my hands. Little did I know that feeling of wanting of this like this wonder and this seeking was actually me feeling this golden thread that has moved through person to person throughout history. And so I find that really fascinating, that what we imagine as children, and then when we get older, we realize that there actually is some kind of tradition that is trying to propel us towards the source. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Those early childhood imaginings of being more than we are, being something, or being in a transformative place where we're becoming something, Of course, it's literally true as children, but that's a childlike insight into the mystery itself. Of course, we can become more than we are. Of course, what we are is not limited to what I look like or what people think I am. And breaking out of that is like the butterfly pushing itself out of that cocoon it's been in.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Okay, so then back to the Crowley thing, now that it came to my head, is Crowley was part of MI6, and he was a double agent in the World War II, correct? And a lot of people want to think that he was an agent of discord in that and only going after his own thing. And so is there any myth that you want to dispel of Crowley's MI6 days?
Well, I will confess that part of his biography is not something I've studied deeply, so I don't know that I have a lot to add to what's out there, if any. But my understanding is that his head and heart were in the right place from the perspective of a English gentleman, who wanted to help his country. Certainly, a lot of you could find writings, poetry, and other things like that that are obviously kind of rally cries around, you know, um, fighting tyranny and all sorts of things like that. So I know that it was I guess for him seemed to be a natural expression of some of those impulses. But in terms of the details, I'm not a good source.
Yeah. That's totally fine. That's good, actually, that we can say that we don't know, because then people can take us a little more seriously, right?
I'm not a biographer.
Yeah. There's a lot of books out there they can read. But what I found interesting is that with the swastika and what Hitler was doing, Crowley then was tasked to create a magical sigil that would counteract the swastika, and that's where you get the piece, the V, which is the Typhonian, to be able to go up against that. So it's interesting, which I'm always trying to help people understand, is that the occult, we would have a better understanding of how we got here if we understood the history of the occult through time.
Certainly, because it's an undercurrent that some people is just too hot to touch, so they don't bother, or they feel like it's too hot to touch.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of Aleister and Adolf by Douglas Rushkoff?
I'm pretty sure I've heard that title. I know I haven't read it.
Yeah, it's a comic book he wrote, and there are some ridiculous things in there, but it's about the similarities and differences between Crowley and Hitler, or what Hitler's sorcerers and magicians around him were doing to have this magical battle of World War II going on. And so my understanding is that Crowley was, yes, working as a double agent, but he was working for the crown at that time, trying to help the crown win the great battle that was going on. Yeah. Are there any other great myths that you would like to dispose of at this moment of Crowley and or Thelema?
Well, there's so many nonsense stories about Crowley out there that it's easier to just to say something in a blanket way, like, if you're reading something about Crowley that sounds like a horrible thing that he did, almost certainly he didn't. You know, unless your definition of horrible is experimented with drugs and was open to, uh, uh, sexuality being more free in a way that some people are threatened by, I guess. Um, Unless that's your definition of evil, um, probably any outlandish story that sounds terrible is not true. Um, and so I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that's good. And
Do
I
your
don't.
research. I'm not defending
Yeah,
Crowley as
no,
being a perfect person, but it's
no.
not like the truly horrific shit you see.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree because I read a book and I don't remember what it was called. The cover had a bunch of newspaper clippings of Crowley, and all the bad stuff. And so, and as somebody who had realigned and really put out really well about how many people how many journalists hated him at that time. And so, most of the time, if you're reading something bad about him, it was because somebody had a grudge against him and was coming
Yeah,
out
or
with.
that it sold in the tabloid sense, like the sex cult in Sicily where you do whatever you want. I mean, it was just that kind of stuff, capitalizing on a misunderstanding and for sales. But
Yeah.
again, a tale is told as old as time.
Yeah, and then I remember actually, one of the things was that a gentleman died at, was it Cefalu?
Cefalu, yeah.
Yeah, and because of the water they were drinking or something
Like
that
some bad
happened.
water. Yeah. I think it was gastroenteritis from bad water.
Huh. And
If I recall
people were
correctly.
trying to state that they were sacrificing animals and drinking their blood and stuff like that. Is there any
That would
truth
be
to
the
that?
easy way to go. Yeah. You know, of course it was, if someone died, there must be sinister events behind it.
Yeah.
That proves it, you know.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating, especially because in this day and age that everyone always wants to go to those types of things and then stating that he was sacrificing or doing anything like that, and which is crazy to me, only in the fact that we see how many narratives there are about what's going on in our current day and age, and so the same people who are pushing that this has to be a certain way about Aleister Crowley, and then also is all like, don't believe all the narratives on a thing; it's actually something else. And so there's such a cognitive dissonance into the stuff that we don't understand, especially if it's some kind of Abrahamic tradition trying to push their own agenda.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, here's a litmus test question for anyone who's worried about Crowley's evilness.
Yeah.
Did he drop a bomb on anyone?
Right.
Did he create policies that disenfranchise or enhunger millions of people? What scale are we talking about here? I think that part of it just makes me mad that we see people being so cruel and irresponsible in the world today in ways that are so much more destructive.
Yeah.
Unapologetically, we don't even question it. But any world leader has done things so much more heinous than anything Crowley ever did. I can't tolerate it.
Yeah, I agree. No, I'm very similar. It's not like we're apologists, but there's also a little bits of trying to set the facts straight, especially like stupid things like Barbara Bush. Crowley's daughter was Barbara Bush, or Barbara Bush's mom, or there's such ridiculousnesses.
Crowley, the rumor was Crowley was Barbara Bush's son.
That's yeah.
And I will admit the resemblance is uncanny if you look at certain photos. I've met Crowley's daughter and his grandson, and
You
they
have.
didn't look. I have, yeah. And I the resemblance was stronger there than Barbara Bush and Crowley. Let's just put it that way.
That's awesome. I didn't actually know. I figure I know he has a bunch of children around, but do they? How did you meet them?
So the his grandson through Astarte, who was born at Cefalu. And so his daughter was Astarte, and eventually brought to the U.S. and raised there under another name. And her son became. I'm trying to preserve his anonymity a little bit, but
please.
I became acquainted with him through some of his public endeavors in the arts world, and got to be friends with him. And then at one of his events, his mom was there. So cool. I knew who she was, of course. So for her to come up and introduce herself as, "Hi, I'm so and so's mom," and that's all she
Yeah.
says. And like, I am aware, I'm aware of who you are.
Oh, that's cool. Nice. So then I think it's really important for people to know that for myself, Crowley's work has been so transformative for myself and obviously for you as well. One of my things that I want to help with our community is to bring the gentleman back to magic, because I feel like it's gone so far away from its main. One of the things I liked about the early 1900s, late 1800s Golden Dawn was that I felt like they were, in Crowley, they were all so dapper. And there was this level of the classics and bringing the classics back into, with William Yeats, Bram Stoker, and all these characters. They were well read in history and ancient philosophy and classical literature. So to bring it into the mythological and the classical literature, how important is classical literature and the mythology of our past in our current magical practices?
I think just being well-rounded in our education is how I would put it. That whether it's classical or recent, the problem I think is a dedication to our self-education in life, and reaching beyond what's the low-hanging fruit of internet stuff and all of that. Part of that is a failure of the educational system, progressively. Understanding, we're doing a lot better than 100 years ago in the big picture, but I think the problem is within that subset of people who go through the education system in the US, as an example. You're clearly, it's not the same as it used to be in terms of the breadth of background and training that they get. So whatever school you're going to or not going to, I think the key is a personal dedication to being as well-rounded and well-read and experienced as you can be.
Yeah, no, I agree. It just came to me. One of the things I was thinking about was how so many people. So Jack Parsons was a student of Crowley's in Crowley's older years. One of Jack Parsons's friends, indirectly, right, through writing, right? They were just
I
writing
don't
notes back and
know
forth.
that they had any direct correspondence, actually. Crowley was mostly hearing about Parsons through letters back and forth with Carl Germer and Jane Wolfe, who were directly experiencing Parsons. So they were hearing both like, hey, this guy could be the next big thing. We think he's great. And then the next week, Crowley gets a letter saying, boy, we really misjudged Parsons. And I think, oops. So,
Yeah.
but yes,
Okay.
indirectly, certainly, in Crowley's tradition, of course.
Okay, because the reason I bring it up is because a lot of because Parsons went and did his own Babylon working out in the desert and may have not closed some certain workings, and thus people want to interconnect Roswell to what Jack Parsons was doing at that time. Fascinating enough, but what I think is most people don't know is that when Parsons, because I thought I read something where Parsons was writing to Crowley about L. Ron Hubbard and saying that there's this guy who's really smart and he's a science fiction writer, and through the writing, then Crowley was like, "Hey, no, I think you're wrong with this person. You should probably just leave him aside." And then Crowley was actually telling him all the stuff that he was doing was actually like childish and he should stop. But I could be wrong.
The correspondence that I'm aware of around those topics with Parsons is more in line with what I was hearing and reading about from Carl Germer. We published a collection of Carl Germer's letters with Jane Wolfe and others in Temple of Silver Star a few years ago. And so a lot of that phase there with Parsons being active in Southern California, that was a topic of frequent discussion, is like, is he on track? Is he off track? Is he dangerous? Is he a bright spot that we can look to for the next generation? A lot of that kind of back and forth.
Yeah, and then Carl Germer was the head of the OTO at that time, right?
Carl Germer was the head of both AA and OTO
Okay.
between Crowley's death and his own death.
So then I want to get back on topic about how important the Western esoteric tradition is. I find it to be, if not the most important tradition for the evolution of mankind. And I know that's a real big statement, but I find how important it is to the individual to find meaning in life. And without an understanding of our own personal meaning, of having our own personal myth to live off of in a very Joseph Campbell hero's journey way, that then we get caught within modernity and this postmodern world. And so I would like to hear your opinion on what you think about where we're at in our current zeitgeist, as well as how important it is for the Western esoteric tradition to basically be a bright light in a very dark world.
I am remembering a quote of Jung's, which is one of my favorites to quote, to start this in through the 1950s, middle of the Cold War, all of that. He was asked if there was hope for humanity, basically. And he said, yes, if enough people do their inner work. And I think that throws down the gauntlet for the individual journey of self-discovery being a fundamental requirement for society to work well. And if enough people, a critical mass of people, are dealing, if they're living their own truth and being honest with themselves about things and wrestling with their own inner demons and bad guys, then they don't project demons and bad guys onto others as much. And that makes a better world. So that's just one example of how the inner work can help the outer world. But, you know, taking that more broadly to the Western esoteric tradition generally, or perhaps just any tradition that gets you looking inward and learning about yourself and trying to better yourself that way, it's hugely important. And I hope that whatever we can do in the organizations we're in and the public voices that we have, that we can be that beacon that says, let's improve ourselves, let's be our best self in the world and make the world better that way. And if you feel yourself, a message I would say to anybody, if you feel yourself hating someone, if you feel yourself dehumanizing them by limiting them to some straw man version of the bad guy that you can hate conveniently and such, please, before you believe that too much, ask yourself if you're possibly projecting some stuff onto them, if you're missing something in yourself that you can investigate first, if there's something in you hate that you could work on first. If you can remember that even people who do bad things are complete people who probably also do good things, and there are always exceptions, but extreme exceptions. But you know, for the most part, when people interact genuinely one-on-one with each other and in communities, it goes so much better, you know. And this is not a new idea, but they see the humanity in each other much more readily. So anyway, I guess the quintessential answer for that is Western esotericism, the systems that promote it, I think, do have a responsibility for keeping the flame alive of self-discovery and of, you know, making the world a safer place and a better place.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. One of my problems is currently that it feels like politics is getting too involved into the community of magic and the occult, and you're getting far extreme left to far extreme right, and each person wants to basically place blame on the other for the faults of the world. And to me, it seems like unless you understand where even the polis or the political spheres come from in more of a political philosophy way, to what kind of narrations and shadows on the wall that we're falling for, I feel like politics should stay out of magic. What do you feel about that?
Well, it strikes me as an absolutely yes, obvious answer.
Yeah.
What would be the constructive role of politics in magic?
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine. Um, Same with any spiritual tradition. I mean, I think it's natural for spiritual traditions to have views on political topics
Of course.
that grow out of their own belief systems, obviously. Um, and an important role of the people in spiritual traditions is to be active in the community, to the extent that they can be, to have a voice based on their own experience, and maybe some of that experience is a religious tradition, but it's still an individual in society who has a voice. And so that direction doesn't bother me, but politics co-opting or suppressing certainly any spiritual tradition is a great concern.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to lead it to then you yourself are a psychologist, a Jungian psychologist, transpersonal psychologist. One of my things, I have a distaste not for that practice. I think it's really important. I think your work is really important. And I respect you and many psychologists that I've met. But the reason I myself haven't, I've gone to a few or one, one, once that, but it seems like politics has gotten into psychology, and I guess that's where that's leading me to, is that then it's really hard because I have this idea about the great egregores of systems, and I think politics is a great egregore, both the left and the right, and it's this Hegelian dialectic, this war between sides, and it's that war is being pushed on us by either a great entity of whatever or just the billionaire class, the oligarchical billionaire class. And my problem with the psychology thing is that I feel like unless an individual himself, like yourself, has gone through his own alchemization, how can I trust the psychologist to help me through my own process, if that makes sense? Other than that, if they haven't done that, then I feel like all they're doing is projecting onto me a special, what then they think is bad about me without having a clear vessel for themselves to then see what maybe I'm going through. Does that make sense?
Well, I'm sorry. It sounds like you had a not great experience with a therapist. Certainly, just in a big picture way, the matching of client and therapist is hugely important. So be choosy and shop around, if you're looking for a therapist. It's not been my experience within the therapeutic community that it feels very divisive or politicized. And I certainly don't think it would be ethical for a therapist to bring that into the room somehow. If the client didn't bring it up as an issue in their lives they wanted to talk about, to somehow insert their own politics into the dynamic. The other issue that you're alluding to there, I think, is the inner development of the therapist themselves. And if they're going to be good at it, they're going to have to have done some significant inner work, so that, and this is part of the training, so that you know your shit, like your ugly shit, so you worked on that, so you're not projecting it onto the client and not reacting to them out of a personal place, but trying to be perceiving them objectively as a human who's got their own world. There's certainly bad therapists out there, but if my hope would be that most of them know better than to bring that kind of stuff into the interaction.
Yeah. And I guess I bring it up for two reasons, is because of Rigardi talks about it. He himself was a Jungian therapist, correct? And he was
Reichian.
Reichian. Thank you. And he said that he finds it really important for magicians, occultists, esotericists, mystics to go through the therapeutics so they could, it's part of the path of individuation.
Yeah. I don't think necessarily that every magician, on a side point, needs to have formal psychotherapy before doing magic.
Yeah.
I do think it's one of those life experiences that unless you get in the wrong therapy room, which is hopefully rare, it's one of those experiences that helps most people. Like it'd be a thing I would want most people to experience in a deep way, because it's a unique thing to experience, and it can give you insights into yourself that um, you can't get from someone who's actually in your life. If you got someone who's kind of sitting outside a bit, is not socially entwined in any way, it's unique and can be really good. But I think your main point was just about the utility of magicians kind of doing that inner work somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other part of that was I don't know if you've ever read Valis by Philip K. Dick.
I've not read that one. No.
Highly recommend it to not only yourself, everyone. I mean, you've probably read so much you don't have to read it, but I highly I'm a Dickian at heart. Interesting enough, and I think when people ask, what kind of world do we live in? Is it an Orwellian world? Is it a Huxleyan world? They always forget that we live more in a Philip K. Dick world than anything else, I think. But in Valis specifically, he was going through all his breakdowns. He was going through his own alchemization, dark night of his soul, massive realizations, his interaction with the pink beam, which then had him basically be able to diagnose that his son was going through something that was going to kill him, as well as he could then speak Koine Greek after this experience that he had, and that he was living two lives, one where he was at in the time that he was around, and also in 70 AD as another person called Thomas. Anyway, not the point. The point I'm bringing up is he got put into asylum. He had to go in for a while, and he got really lucky that the person that then he was able to speak to, because he was writing his exegesis at that time. And so he was having his own theophany. He was having his own basically godlike experiences, and he felt comfortable enough to tell his therapist there. And the therapist then didn't see him as being crazy, but also was able to then quote biblical passages and Jungian stuff and Gnostic things. And so I find it like, if I were ever to go seek a therapist, I would just hope that they would then see what I was going through as that hero's journey instead of as a psychobabble crazy man.
I think that's part of the therapist selection interviewing process. You want to ask questions. I did a podcast on this episode on this in Living Thelema, but you want to ask questions like, are you open to alternative spiritual approaches? How do you feel about a mythological inner journey that is going to sound crazy at times? Is that a language you can speak with me? And many people who might label themselves as Jungian or transpersonal or humanistic are probably on average better bets for being open to that sort of thing. And some people these days are finding me as a therapist or coach specifically because they're magicians or occultists and know that I'm going to be there's going to be a common language, in the room. So yeah, but it takes some research. I mean, you don't want to go to someone who says, yeah, I'm a Christian counselor, and walk in the door and expect to talk to them about scrying.
Yeah, right. So, yeah. You're talking to what? Angels? No, that's strange. Only priests do that.
Yeah. And then the dreaded,
Yeah, exactly. So then I would like to know about, please give me your, what is it about Thelema that gets such a bad rap? And I think we've hit a little bit of that about talking about Crowley. And why is it so integrated into the new age psychology of what's going on with what I would call people who are LARPing or cosplaying? And again, this could be my own projection, but I see it a lot in this internet sphere, as well as I would consider myself following Thelemic dictates of what I've read Liber Oz. It's basically plain. Liber Oz just lays it out really easily. And I'm all like, yep. And then there's something about it when I see other Thelemites out there, I'm all like, I want to stay as far away from that as possible. And so why is Thelema so important in our current day and age?
I think that the primary answer is the root of what it even is as a tradition. And that is that we are to discover who we are by stripping away the illusions that we have about ourselves, or that society foists upon us, or that our families expected of us, or all that stuff. Strip that away in the most efficient way we can, learn who we really are, what our real true nature is. What are we here to be in the world? Not just do, but be. It's an understanding of the importance of true will as a way of being that is unique to us. And if we each do the work of discovering that together, the world becomes a more harmonious place where there's less tendency toward conflict, because people are paying attention to, to be colloquial, stay in their lane a little bit more, like, I'm doing my thing, I'm not bothering you doing your thing. So it doesn't take much imagination to see why in this world that would be a crucial kind of element that needs to be more widely available, and more importantly, widely practiced. Whether someone calls it Thelema or not, I don't care. I just want more people in the world living that way. So for me personally, that's where things dovetail with my therapy practice and coaching practice and writing and future things I'll write that are more oriented toward the lay public, that may not talk about Thelema, but we'll definitely talk about the principles of Thelema as embedded in the self-discovery process, and hopefully nudge the world to be more like that, even if it's not esoteric for some people.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Do you think that the AA is... So is the AA? I know what it means to me, but is it the structure of what Thelema moves through? Like, if you're part of Thelema, are you also part of AA?
You could argue that from at least two fundamental perspectives. One is AA is just the great cosmic spiritual work that's always going on, and it's not any organization on earth, and it's that sort of great brotherhood idea.
Yep.
So that's just obviously true. Humans, we're on this continuum of working on spiritual things, and some people are maybe a little further down the path than others, and you can think of that as sort of a cosmic grading system of initiatory grades, but in the more human sense of an organization whose administration is continuous from Crowley and has a centralized way of tracking who's in the organization and who's not, and assigning teachers to people. In that sense, yeah, it's a structured way of implementing Thelema in the world. And Temple of the Silver Star does the same thing, but in a group ritual way. These are structures that allow us, I think, to harness some of the landmarks of inner progress and make it easier for people to get to the place of knowledge and conversation more quickly, and without reinventing the wheel or falling into the many pitfalls.
Yeah, that's good. Then how important is in all that to train the will and train your imagination?
It's essential. I mean, at one level, as I was referencing earlier, it's the mysticism, the yoga of it is a training of the will, in the sense of training the mind not to be distracted by things in general. And then when we're trying to focus on will, we've got a mind that's been trained how to focus, so, and how to say, that's a distraction, that's a left turn, I don't have to waste time on it. Aging helps with this too, I've found. We get sensitive to not wasting time. And it helped me back to the core of the question.
Just how important is it to train the will and train the imagination, which I find to be,
yeah. So as far as training the will and the imagination beyond what I just said about the inner mystical side, to be a good magician, you have to access the force. You have to shape it in your imagination to be the thing you're wanting to create change around. So we've got a technology that gradually and progressively helps people do that, helps them train the mind to be still, train their energetic system to open up to and contain the energy safely, and to train their mind to shape their ritual work and their intention, including like visualize things and imaginative things in a way that will get them the magical goals they're looking for, which ideally translate into taking steps on the path of true will.
Yeah. And then that leads me into wanting to know what you think about the more in the middle pillar, and as he talks, or yeah, the middle pillar, he talks about, Rigardi talks about the mnemonic system of what magical implements and tools are actually trying to do to help the internal practice. And he states how in that it's, yes, do the whole ritual externally dramatic theater and things like that, but to take it to the pillow or your meditation, and then to set up the astral temple of the mind, that is where the true initiation takes place. Am I misquoting, or am I missing something with this understanding of the mnemonics of the body?
I think what's often happening is that it's happening on both levels simultaneously. When we're doing a ritual physically, we are doing it astrally, whether we're tuned into that part of it or not. When we now, there is a virtue in training the astral body, and you can think of that imaginatively, or you could think of that as the actual, an actual structure that can be separate from the physical body and so on. That's less important than the results, but there's virtue in training ourselves to operate mentally, astrally, etc., while not doing anything with our physical body. In fact, one of Crowley's writings that's designed for the knowledge and conversation working itself, Liber Samec, is all about doing this rather complex set of visualizations and ritual movements, all in the astral body while sitting
Yes.
in asana.
Yes.
So it's absolutely a virtue to that. Different kind of muscle, but I think we wouldn't want to say that when we're doing something physically, we're not also doing that at another level.
Yeah. And did he not try the holy guardian angel on a donkey with him and Rose and his child while they were traveling?
He initiated the Ibermelon working, Siskiyou working while he was still at Boleskine. Didn't get very far into that. Started doing some travels and completed it eventually, riding around on a donkey. I don't remember if Rose was there or not with him for that trip.
I thought it was hilarious because supposedly all of a sudden him and the donkey fell off the path, and he didn't remember any of those things.
The claim was, I just woke up and didn't realize I tumbled down a cliff on my donkey. But
Yeah.
Crowley was sometimes prone to hyperbole, as we know.
Yeah, weird. No, not him.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the passages in the big blue book for Magic and Theory and Practice where it actually hit me quite hard, where he called the Philosopher's Stone one of the greatest of all rituals. If you don't do anything else, is the LBRP. Do you remember that when he stated that in that is could be the, like, if you don't do any other ritual, that would be the one to make sure you're always doing?
Yeah, I think that's fundamentally true for anyone in a tradition, to any adjacent tradition to Thelema, where it's the Western system, some basic pentagram, hexagram type rituals. And if you're buying into that way of thinking about ritual at all, then yeah, the lesser ritual of the pentagram is the one to be starting with. I did a podcast episode on getting started with a basic magical regimen, and that's basically part of my progression there. Start with being able to relax first.
Yeah.
Get good at that. Then practice the lesser invoking and banishing lesser ritual of the pentagram daily. Do that for a while. Think about adding the hexagram ritual. Think about adding the middle pillar practice. Think about other kinds of devotional practices. So it kind of all builds from a foundation with the LRP. And I think one of the reasons that is because that's where we can learn what it even means to manage our energetic system in a magical context, in a ritual context. How do we know what it feels like to have banished force? How do we know what it feels like to draw a visualized pentagram and experience that it made a difference in the room? What difference did it make? How do you feel differently after you do this ritual every day? And you won't know those answers from doing it 10 times. You'll know those answers from doing it hundreds and thousands of times. It doesn't mean that you do that before you do anything else that many times, but over the course of extended practice, you really learn what it is to be working with magical force itself. And how can you do something else if you don't know that fundamental set of facts about yourself?
Yeah, I love that. That's very true. Then I am continually saying this is something that I think Christopher Moore, I can't remember who the author is, but the idea is that we shall all become, through the working from that more Jungian individuation model and lens, that we should all become our own king or queen, lover, magician, warrior. And so I want you to tell me, am I just filling people full of fluff, or is that not what it means to go through the great? One of the meanings to go through the great work is to fully actualize yourself as the king, magician, warrior, lover.
You could pick different archetypal expressions of that. I mean, I can imagine a number of other quaternities that might have worked well there, but I think it's absolutely the case in a fundamental sense that discovering ourselves deeply and learning how to express ourselves fully in the world and understand ourselves as all of these aspects, whatever version of categories you want to throw out there, some balanced whole system is essential, to doing it healthfully and to changing the world in the way that's in accord with our true will.
Yeah. So then why did you write your last two books? What do you think was missing in the Western esoteric tradition of books and stuff that you felt like the Living Will and the Living Thelema? Like why did you write your books?
I with Living Thelema, I'd been doing the podcast Living Thelema for a few years, and it was just obvious that each episode could be the foundations of a book chapter. I didn't really intend that when I started the podcast, but then it was like, oh, okay, this book's kind of writing itself and I've essentially outlined every chapter with what I've already outlined to talk about it on the podcast. So, but the impulse for the podcast and therefore the book also was I'd spent decades training it directly or indirectly thousands of people doing this work. And I have insights into the practical application of this system based on people's real world responses to it that I think is kind of rare in the world of occultism today, certainly within the Thelemic context. And so it seemed like that needed to be out there. Here's how do you actually do this stuff? Coming from somebody who's not taking a theoretical perspective on how you should do this stuff, but is taking a practical perspective based on actually having trained people to do it and seeing what works and doesn't, and pro tips, for making things work as best they can. So that was Living Thelema. Way of the Will, which is the more recent one that came out through Wiser in 2024, is the continuation of that in some senses, that some of those chapters are things that didn't make it into Living Thelema because of the timing of it. But the rest of it is things I needed to say about some of the insights I'd gotten into Kabbalistic psychology and its relationship to the great work, the new aeon, and sex magic and all of other things. Part of it was wanting a place to talk about my own HGA experience and put that into print in the hopes that it could be helpful, because not many people have done that so far. So that was really the impetus to put those two books out. There is a third book under my own name so far, which is The Winds of Wisdom, and that's just a record of my scrying of the 30 Enochian aethers, and a presentation of some tech for doing that. So
Yeah.
different type of book.
Okay. That's great. And I think everyone should go out there and buy all of Dr. Shoemaker's books. They are fantastic. They are, you can gain something every time you open the book up. And I think it's not an easy read, but it's not a hard read. It's something that is kind of, I think, due to your practice, how to lay out a book so people can follow it as well as garner great information from it. So I do think everyone out there should go pick up your work, as well as please go and listen to his Living Thelema podcast. It is another one of those things where each topic helps break things down, and you do it in a very easy to digest way. Not because of it's easy, but because you know how to present the information very wisely.
Well, thanks for saying so. And for people looking for that, the Living Thelema YouTube channel is a dedicated YouTube channel, just to present all of those archived podcast episodes. So it's all on there, every single one of them, along with some supplementary resources, like here's me demonstrating pranayama in a embarrassingly old and grainy video that I need to update, and things like that. I wanted to let people know too that an important upcoming project for me back in the musical area is that I've got an album coming out in the late 2026 that's not just where I'm at musically, but also is going to have some heavily mystical and initiatory related themes. It's almost like a musical, magical autobiography in certain ways. So I'm excited to bring that out as a different way of kind of coming into the world with it.
That's amazing. Yeah, definitely. We'll definitely be on the lookout for that. And yeah, that's fantastic. So let's give me one great ending here. What do you think magic does? What does magic do for us, and why is it so important for everyone to not only get past their own prejudices, but to truly become their own magician?
Imagine if you went through the day and went through the course of weeks, months, and years with much more certainty about right choices and much more certainty about how to not waste your time, how to feel like doors open instead of close, feel like you're swimming with the current instead of against it, feel like you can have a more harmonious interaction with people because you know yourself more and you're not getting in their way of living their lives, in a harmonious way. Imagine that world for yourself. And that's, I think, a pretty good vision of what this can bring if you follow the systems that we have and dedicate yourself to it and persist and get frustrated and still persist anyway, and trust that you can become more yourself, and that's accessible. That's something that is doesn't have to remain secret or unavailable to anybody, if they do the work. And it's hard, but what's harder is not doing it. It's just that the harder part of not doing it is invisible, and the hard part of doing it is like the grind. Every day, oh god, I got to sit here and do my meditation, or I got to do the ritual. That's a hard part that is in your face, but what's invisible is how much harder your life would be if you feel like you actually are swimming upstream all the time. I don't mean to imply that everyone that there aren't situational and societal challenges that can really make it hard for some people to do what they need to do in the world. But to the extent that you can, whoever you are, if you're trying to go on this journey and learn about yourself and do the best you can to live that way in the world, please do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That was beautiful. That was a great answer to that. And I thank you so much. I feel like we could go for a few more hours, and I definitely want to bring you back on multiple times in the future
Love
when
to.
your music comes out, you write new books, or if I really feel like I have, like there's something needs to be set straight in the world of occult,
Sure.
Crowley, Thelema, and the AA. So thank you for coming on, Dr. David Shoemaker.
Absolutely.
You are a gentleman and a scholar, and it's somebody that when you speak, I think everyone can hear your sincerity and your wisdom, and just your poise. And I think that is something lost in our day and age. And not only myself can take your example, but many other people in the world. And so again, I thank you for coming on.
Thank you for the kind words, and it's been a great talk.
Yeah. And is there anything you want to just, again, drop all your stuff and tell all the people where they can find you?
Sure. So watch my Instagram and Facebook spaces for announcements about books and music. It's dshoemaker93 on Instagram. Very inventive screen name there. And for the organizations I work with, if you're looking for a Temple of the Silver Star, a Thelemic Golden Dawn patterned organization, that's TOTSS.org. If you're looking for AA, you can reach us at onestarinsight.org. And the livingthelema.com website also has an archive of podcast episodes and other resources. I would like to put in a plug for the ThelemaCon, which is a public Thelemic conference that we do every 2 years. This one will be online only, October 24, 25, I believe. And if you go to thelemacon.org, you can see the speakers we have there, and that's going to be a great event.
Awesome. Yeah, I didn't know about that. I will definitely make sure to try to put some of that information in the description below so people can kind of go and find your things.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Shoemaker. This conversation and many more where that is to come. So again, thank you.
Thank you for having me. We'll see you next time.
You're very welcome. Everyone out there, just make sure in the dark ages that we're living in, it's not so dark, especially when you can become your own beacon and your own light. I think conversations like this and the many others that we are having are so important in this empire of ages that we live in. Even though the chaos is there, you can stand in the center and you can control all the elements that are around you. And it's by finding your own will, by training it and by honing the imagination through these practices that we have talked about today and through these traditions that are there. It's more there than it ever has been, I think, in a lot of ways. And we can truly find this as a new renaissance or the fall of an age or both, but you don't have to fall with it. And so again, I say, make sure, if you haven't already, subscribe, like, and share, because Magus and the Media is here to make sure that myth, magic, and meaning is seen and found and discovered in everything that we do. And I completely and utterly appreciate every single person out there. And I hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you.